My name's Chad, and I'm a teacher. I'm a teacher at my core, and I am also a learner at my core. I'm very proud of those things. The reason I came here today doesn't have anything to do with me being a teacher, though. The path that sort of led me here today has to do with the fact that I was on TV. And more specifically, I was on a reality show. Now, I wish there was a reality show about teaching, and that's why I was here. It would be great to see a reality show about teachers. Any teacher fans out there, right? I don't think anyone's not going to raise their hand for teachers. But I was actually on that TV show Survivor. And it was a pretty big sensation at the time, and I was very proud to be on that. But there was something that sort of set me apart from the other contestants on the show. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a second. But let me preface all this by showing you some video from Survivor. So check this out. Okay, so what you did not see on that video, and what my fellow contestants didn't see, is that I have this crazy prosthetic foot. Now, I went on to the show purposely with those zippy pants with the bottoms that come off. I went on with the pants, just like I came out here initially, so that I would come out and my fellow contestants wouldn't be able to judge me either way. And myself and the producers of the show wanted to create this sort of social experiment to see whether or not I would be judged differently before and after revealing this fact. And it was very interesting how it played out. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this idea of preconceived notions, whether or not they, judged me based on what I was able to do, or whether they reverted back to this idea of preconceived notions. I'm further going to go into this idea of circumstances and how we shouldn't let circumstances, adverse or negative circumstances, affect who we are or how we live, but rather we can affect our own circumstances and change them. So let me talk a little bit about how this all came about, a little bit of background. I was born perfectly able-bodied, a very active kid. I was into all kinds of sports and activities. Soccer was my big love as a kid, and I still love it today. I played soccer all through high school and into college, getting onto a men's premier soccer team at age 33. It was an over 30 league. We were doing pretty well. We moved up a division, and there was something that was bothering me on the bottom of my foot. It was this little bump on the bottom of my foot. And I had it checked out. The doctors said if it grows, come back. There wasn't a lot of worry about it. But my cleats were starting to bug me, as I said, and I had this thing removed on my insistence. So no big deal, it was an outpatient thing. But when they removed this growth, they found that it was a cancerous tumor. It was more specifically synovial sarcoma, which is a very rare and deadly form of sarcoma. Totally unexpected. As you can understand, young, nothing in the family. And so I was facing my own mortality at this point. And it was difficult to do that. Being married for a few years, our daughter was 1 year old at the time. And I really saw I had a vision of how my life would sort of unfold. I was very clear in that vision. I knew that I would see my daughter grow up, develop, and I really wanted to teach her how to be a good person and, graduate high school and eventually walk her down the aisle, and we wanted to have more children. And these are things that I knew would come to fruition somehow, but I really didn't have it in me to face my own mortality at that point. I rather wanted to focus on something more practical, and that was what was I going to do to solve this problem. And they gave me 2 surgical options. One was called a wide excision, where they remove most of the foot around where the tumor was, the margins. It would leave me with a permanent limp and wouldn't be able to run again. The second was what I just called the unspeakable, and this has a lot to do with soccer. And it was to remove the leg part way down the shin, remove the entire foot, an amputation. And I couldn't even fathom that at the time when the doctors told me this. But I had to get practical, as I said, went home and did some research. And the research was fruitful. It was just amazing what I found online, what men and women all over the world were doing with these amazing technologically advanced prostheses. I'm talking from running to cross country, skiing and snowboarding, triathlon, and even up to soccer. And it really inspired me, and it sort of flipped a switch and allowed me to see what people with this type of disability are capable of. And so even though it was the unspeakable, I just had to go with the latter, and that was amputation. Now, the surgery itself was not pleasant, but the recovery was the toughest thing, being cooped up for long periods of time. That was the tough part for me. I was in a bit of a funk right after the surgery, but got out of it by really creating small goals for myself and achieving these sort of, easily attainable goals, getting into a temporary prosthesis, getting into something that I could start to bear weight on, starting to get into physical therapy eventually, and then to the point where I could start to walk on my own a little bit with the aid of crutches. But that was a big accomplishment. And after about 3 months, I got back into teaching, back to work. So I was welcomed back by my 3rd grade class, welcomed back Mr. C, and it was a big deal. And I was really happy to be back to work and be back with kids. And it was especially a good transition for me because, and I'm looking at this in hindsight, because there was no judgment from these little kids. So I was Mr. C, had the foot removed, and I was still the same Mr. C, and they didn't really have that same sort of, possibly awkward judgment that you'd get from a large group of coworkers or adults. It was just a very accepting atmosphere, and I look back at that and realized that was probably something that helped me sort of become accustomed to, being a new member of this disabled community. So that helped quite a bit, and it was kind of fun actually at first. I eventually got to the point where I was going back out on the playground as yard duty. And so I'd be dressed very much like this on a beautiful spring day with shorts and, teacher garb. And the rest of the school didn't know about how I looked. I'd heard there were rumors from the other kids in the rest of the school about Mr. C losing his foot. My class knew what was up, but they didn't. And I'd heard stuff like, robot foot, Terminator, Transformer, peg leg, pirate, like all of it. And none of them knew. But when I finally emerged from the classroom with the shorts, they were just, oh. And I had this sort of semicircle of grommets following me around everywhere, asking questions. And, I was like a tour guide every recess. And I was happy to do it. I'd show them the little components and turn it into a teachable moment. And, it was great, but it was hilarious what their questions were. Now, a lot of times they'd stand about 10 feet away, point, the little kids, like we're talking 6 years old, and they'd point and go, "Where's your foot, Mr. C?" And I would bring them over and show them and say, same thing as I told my 3rd graders, there was something wrong with the bottom of my foot and we had to remove it so it didn't make the rest of my body sick. And the big kids will go for that, but the little ones are like, "No, where's your foot?" Like they physically want to know where it went. Like, what did you do with the foot? They want to sort of complete the picture, and they don't know what, I remove it. They want to know, where did it go? So I have no answer for them. I'm not going to explain that to them. So I came up with something, and invariably the kids, these stay still, like kids in the neighborhood, 5, 6 years old, cognitively they want to complete that. And they say, "Where's your foot?" Now the next time a kid did that, he says, "Where's your foot, Mr. C?" And I said, I noticed he was missing a couple teeth. And I was like, "Well, where's your teeth, dude? Touche." And he told me he'd lost his teeth. And I said, well, what happened? He told me they fell out, and I said, well, did you put them under your pillow? And yeah. Tooth fairy come? He said, yeah. And I said, how much did you get? And he told me he got like a golden dollar for each tooth. And I was like, oh, that's good. And he said, same sort of thing happened here. Like my foot came loose one day. It was kind of wiggly, and sure enough, it got more and more wiggly, and finally it did come off. And so I put it on my pillow, same thing. You know, it was kind of hard to sleep that night, but finally I did nod off. And I said, the next morning I woke up, and there was a huge stack of cash, like this big mountain of money. And they're like, oh my gosh, Mr. C, you're rich. So it was good. And then I started hearing this stuff about foot fairy and, you know, different fairies, and imagining there's different fairies for different body parts and a corresponding amount of cash for each. So, you know, I don't know what I started there, but it was fun. And it was a good transition, like I said. The next goal I set for myself was the summertime. The school year was ending, and the summer, I would typically do some sort of a race, a triathlon. And I kept that on my schedule. I scheduled or signed up for a triathlon in Pleasanton, California. Try for Fun. It's a pretty easy sprint distance triathlon, although it would only have been 9 months since my surgery, so I really had to kind of prepare for it. And I trained and finished that triathlon. I didn't run the entire portion of the run. I did the swim, bike, and then run, walk, you know. But it really helped me just to sort of feel like I was getting right back on the horse, and I could just get back into these athletics that I enjoyed before. And so that propelled me into directions that I was confident I'd be able to do stuff, but I didn't know what lay ahead, and that was kind of a big deal. The fall came, and the new season of Survivor was starting. That was back when they had the fall lineups, and my wife and I were huge fans of this show, Survivor. We sat down to watch the premiere of Survivor 8, which was the all-star season, huge deal. So we sat down to watch it. I just finished the triathlon like a month or two before. It starts off, and the announcer on CBS says, if you'd like to be the next contestant on Survivor, send in your tape, and this is for this season that follows, send in your video, etc. And that's when it occurred to me, and it all lined up. I mean, literally and figuratively, because my foot was like up on the ottoman, foot, and there's the TV, and I was like, okay, it's lining up, and I thought, this is gonna be something they're gonna want on this season after All Stars. And I really just had this whole vision of how it would work, and my video, and how I would do it, and so it did, it happened. I sent it in, and I got on to Season 9, Vanuatu, Islands of Fire. And so now full circle, back to where I'm revealing the fact that I have this fake foot. How were the guys gonna react? And again, it's men. This is an all-male tribe. Now, I had no idea going on. I would much rather have had it be mixed, but this was all guys, and it was all about, you know, being sturdy and solid. So, you know, I had an even harder time of it. And so I revealed, wondering after all these months what they're going to say, what they're going to do, how they're going to react. And they were cool for the most part, although they were good with it. But I had to take this with a grain of salt because there's cameras on them, right, showing their reactions. So I felt that I needed to wait for at least several days to see what their personalities were and to see if these were genuine reactions. But they accepted me for the most part. There was one exception to that, and this goes along with this sort of social experiment. One guy reverted back to his preconceived notions. He tried to get me voted off based on the fact that I had this disability, not based on what he saw. He saw it with his own eyes, but based on what he believed before. And he went around to the others and systematically tried to get me voted off. Didn't work, and we voted his butt off of there pretty quickly. Suffice to say that I was voted off finally when the men's and women's tribes merged. So 3/4 of the way through the game, the two tribes merged into one. And the men only had 3 left. The women were dominating the entire time. 6 women, 3 guys, and I was voted off the second guy. And I was second on the jury. So that's how I left Survivor. However, it was an amazing, amazing experience. And I feel like, even though it was a great personal experience, one of the sort of most valuable things that I took away from Survivor was the feedback that I got back from fans and people who were watching the show from all over the country. And especially valuable to me were those that were riding with disabilities and saying that I inspired them somehow and that it gave them a sense of what they could do. I feel like I was just passing on that sense of inspiration that I got when I was researching the men and women who were doing amazing things, when I was looking into what sort of prosthetic foot I was going to get, what surgery I was going to get. So when I was inspired by those individuals, they really instilled into me, when I was researching this sense of possibility, of wow, I can do this. So this sense of this is possible. And I feel like it was my privilege to be able to take that and pass that on to people through a television show. So now, being this sort of de facto spokesperson with those with disabilities on TV, I kind of started to set my sights a little higher. So I wanted to do some more sort of challenging athletic pursuits. And so I started to get more into triathlon. This first slide is me doing an Xterra. The Xterra is a off-road triathlon. It's very demanding. And so I sort of upped my game a bit and continued doing triathlon, Olympic distance, and Xterra. This is a sprint foot. I started doing some competitive snowboarding, a camp with Adaptive Action Sports. My good friend Amy Purdy was the founder of this Adaptive Action Sports, where I trained at this camp called Wendell's, and then I went on to the USASA Nationals, where I won a couple medals, including this gold one here in slope style. Did the New York City Marathon. This is in a span of 5 or 6 years. Very challenging, but very rewarding at the same time. Got back into soccer, and it was truly amazing to be able to play soccer again. This last year, I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro with the Challenged Athletes Foundation, the CAF, Sea Africa expedition, and was the person representing those with disabilities there. So I was very privileged to be able to do that. Now, my true inspiration each day, if you could see these young men and women, these kids that have disabilities, these are my true inspiration on a daily basis. Because, I mean, these kids don't see their disabilities and their tough circumstances as anything other than a normal part of life. And that really inspires me, because truly everybody is going to have tough circumstances or, obstacles in their life, guaranteed. Everyone's going to have those, bigger or smaller. It's just a matter of facing those and accepting and sort of creating your own circumstances like these kids have. Now, what I've been talking about here just comes down to this idea of circumstances and how, even though we're going to have tough circumstances in our life, we're going to face adverse circumstances, we can't let those adverse circumstances affect us and take the upper hand. When we can affect our own circumstances and mold them and shape them into something that's going to be beneficial for us, something that's going to allow us to create the outcomes that we want, and hopefully allow us to help others at the same time. So I see it as sort of an unabashed optimism, yet a practical optimism too. And it's like a bright light illuminating our future and illuminating all that we can achieve. Thank you, guys.